Breaking news now from Hollywood today. Actor Robert Blake has died.
The veteran of film and television was 89 years old.
That Robert Blake has died at 89. His niece Noreen says that he passed away after battling heart disease.
Tonight, Emmy-winning actor Robert Blake has died. He was perhaps best known as TV's Beretta in the 1970s.
On May 4, 2001, beneath the soft glow of streetlights in a quiet Studio City parking lot, a grim tableau unfolded. Robert Blake and his wife, Bonnie Lee Backley, had just left dinner at Vitello's, an Italian restaurant tucked into a Hollywood neighborhood that held memories of laughter and ambition. The air was warm that evening, thick with the scent of citrus from nearby trees and the hum of distant traffic. When Blake returned to their car, he would discover Backley slumped over the steering wheel, bleeding. 2 gunshots, panic. A man pounding on a neighbor's door, voice trembling, asking for help. A frantic 911 call. And later, the discovery of a Walther pistol in a nearby trash bin was a collector's gun with its serial number filed off. The scene was tangled, ambiguous, and haunted by questions. Who fired that shot? Why? And was Robert Blake, the Emmy-winning actor, truly innocent? Rewind, and one finds the story of Robert Blake, beginning long before any scandal, in a world of makeshift stages and childhood shadows. Born Michael James Gubitosi on September 18, 1933, in Nutley, New Jersey, his life began in a modest home filled with immigrant hopes. His parents, Italian immigrants James and Elizabeth Gubitosi, carried in their hearts the dreams of something bigger, not boardrooms or inheritance, but applause, laughter, the theater of life. From barely 2 years old, Michael and his siblings performed in a vaudeville act known as the Three Little Hillbillies, traveling the country in worn trailers, doing sketches under marquee lights, living off the fickle grace of the road. That early life of performance would mold him. The applause became his cradle, and the stage his first refuge. Eventually, the family moved west to Los Angeles, chasing opportunities. In the sprawling sprawl of Hollywood, a young Michael's expressive eyes and wiry frame caught attention. He was cast in the beloved Our Gang comedies, becoming Mickey Gubitosi, a mischievous child in a gang of little rascals. That world, filled with slapstick innocence, masked a more complicated inner life. Even as he laughed and played with other children, he carried the weight of a man too old for his years, absorbing every look, every camera click, every moment of validation. He was learning, quietly, that life itself was a performance. As he grew, his name shifted from Mickey to Bobby and later to Robert Blake. He shed parts of his childhood identity, stepping into roles that demanded more than childlike charm. He acted alongside Hollywood legends. In Humoresque, he played a young John Garfield, and in The Treasure of the Sierra Madre, he stood beside Humphrey Bogart, holding a lottery ticket that would change the fate of the desperate, a powerful brief role, but one that hinted at something deeper in Blake, a capacity to be haunted, to feel deeply, to carry regret even in small moments. Adolescence brought challenges. While the world saw a rising actor, Blake grappled with the loneliness of ambition and the sting of rejection. He moved between genres, westerns, dramas, bit parts, never quite breaking free of his child star identity. He carried scars from his early life that few could see, a deep-seated intensity, a restless soul that refused to settle. He was lean and compact, but inside, his ambition burned like a torch, lighting the shadows of his dreams. Then came a turning point in 1967. That year, he was cast as Perry Smith in Cold Blood, the adaptation of Truman Capote's chilling true crime novel. The role was monumental, a deeply disturbed killer, fragile and terrifying, real and mythic at once. Blake's performance was electric. He embodied Smith's vulnerability and menace in a way that blurred the line between actor and man. Critics were stunned. Suddenly, Blake was no longer just a former child actor. He was a deeply serious artist, someone who could channel darkness, someone who understood what it meant to live on the edge of sanity. The acclaim from In Cold Blood opened doors. He landed heavier roles. In Tell Them Willie Boy Is Here, he brought a brooding intensity. In Electra Glide in Blue, he carried the weight of disillusionment. Yet his true pop culture breakthrough would arrive not on the big screen, but on television. In 1975, he became Tony Beretta, a scruffy, streetwise detective with a cockatoo on his shoulder and a moral compass that teetered. Beretta aired on ABC, and Blake won an Emmy that same year for Outstanding Lead Actor in a Drama Series. That award was more than a trophy. It marked the moment when Robert Blake's career became unshakable, when his public persona crystallized into something both tough and quietly humane. On screen, Beretta was disarming, his voice soft, his instinct brutal, his heart vulnerable. Off-screen, Blake was a different man. Colleagues remembered him as volatile, unpredictable. There were whispers of addiction, of bitter fights, of a private man who carried his childhood into adulthood, like a wound never fully healed. The roar of applause which once comforted him now felt like an accusation, as if each cheer reminded him of how deeply he had sacrificed. As the years passed, the roles began to slip. By the early 1990s, his name appeared less often. His face, once lit by the glare of studio lights, grew more lined, more haunted. But Blake was not done. In 1993, he won another Emmy for Judgment Day, The John List Story, playing a man who had slain his entire family. It was as if his art and life reflected each other in an eerie symmetry. He had once played a killer in Cold Blood, and now he portrayed another haunted murderer. That performance was a bittersweet reminder that he remained a master of darkness, even as Hollywood's spotlight dimmed. As his career slowed, his personal life grew more complicated. He had been married before his first marriage to actress Sandra Kerr, began in 1961 and ended in 1983. They had 2 children, Noah and Elina. But it was later in life, in the quiet of failed ambitions and loneliness, that he encountered Bonnie Lee Bakley. They met around 1999 at a jazz club, a place where Blake often sought solace in music, a place that felt like home. Bakley, older, enigmatic, full of ambition and past scars of her own, was drawn to him. Sources say she had married many times before, that she had a history of using aliases, of weaving illusions for men in the spotlight. Their relationship was intense, immediate, and tangled. In June 2000, Bakley gave birth to a daughter. Initially, she named her Christian Shannon Brando, claiming Christian Brando's son, Marlon Brando, was the father. But when DNA tests were done, the truth emerged. The child, Rose Lenore Sophia, was Robert Blake's. Privately, he seemed elated, but publicly, there was tension. On November 19, 2000, Blake and Bakley were married in a union that many observers described as uneasy, fraught with trust issues, and laced with obsession. Not long after their marriage, their world turned fatal. On the evening of May 4, 2001, they dined together at Vitello's. Blake said he left his gun at the table for protection, went back to get it, and returned to find Bakley shot. The horror of that moment was amplified by the horror of the unknown. Who had done this? Blake was frantic, calling for help, pounding on doors, summoning someone, anyone to save her. The blood on the leather seats, the flashing lights of police cars, the sterile beeps of emergency responders. The parking lot became a stage for tragedy. Investigators later found a Walther pistol, but the gun, discovered in a nearby trash bin, had its serial number filed off. It was untraceable. Blake insisted that the gun he carried was different. He claimed the residue on his hands could have been from his own weapon, not the murder weapon. But questions swirled. 2 former stuntmen later testified that Blake had attempted to hire them to kill Bakley. They claimed he had used crude words. He wanted her snuffed. According to insiders, Blake's life after Beretta had grown lonely. his heart hollow, his connection to his daughter complicated by Backley's controlling behavior. On April 18, 2002, police arrested him at his Hidden Hills home. The charges were grave: murder with special circumstances, solicitation of murder, conspiracy. The man who once charmed audiences was now at the center of a real-life courtroom drama. The trial, beginning in late 2004, became a spectacle of Hollywood excess and true crime desperation. In the courtroom, Blake was both defendant and tragedy. Prosecutors painted a portrait of a man who had plotted his wife's death to gain sole custody of his daughter. The defense offered chaos in return. Backley's past, her aliases, her criminal behavior, the unreliability of the stuntmen who claimed she was to be killed. The trial included bombshell testimony, taped phone calls, and heated cross-examinations. Prosecutors showed that Blake had placed dozens of calls to one of the stuntmen on a prepaid phone card, calls they said were part of a secret, sinister plan. The defense attacked the credibility of both witnesses, exposing histories of substance abuse, instability, and self-interest. Experts testified about the gunpowder on Blake's hands. Only a handful of particles, they said, far fewer than would be expected if he had fired the killer gun. No eyewitnesses had seen him pull the trigger. By the time the jury reached its verdict, the air in the courtroom felt electric with suspense and sorrow. On March 16, 2005, after months of testimony, the jury acquitted Robert Blake of all criminal charges. The courtroom reacted in stunned silence. The man who had once played killers now stood accused of being one, and the jury said he was not guilty. His hands shook. Tears rolled down his face. He hugged his lawyers. Reporters snapped photos. The world watched in disbelief. But freedom came with its own price. In November 2005, a civil jury found him liable for his wife's death in a wrongful death lawsuit brought by Backley's children, and ordered him to pay $30 million. The judgment was later reduced, but the damage to his reputation and finances was irreversible. He declared bankruptcy. His wealth, once tied to fame and success, evaporated. He retreated from the public eye, transformed from a seasoned actor into something more fragile, a man burdened by grief, legacy, and unanswered questions. In the years that followed, Blake's life grew smaller, quieter. He spoke intermittently to the media, in rare interviews in which he sounded reflective, broken, and defiant. He once told an AP reporter that his life had been on hold for years before Backley, that she had taken me out of the stands and put me back in the arena. He said his daughter Rose was his anchor. "Rosie is my blood. Rosie is calling me." But their relationship was not simple. For years, he lost contact with her. According to the PBS NewsHour, they reconnected only decades later. PBS. He tried to rebuild in small ways. In interviews, he spoke of poetry, of music, of longing. In 2006, he said he was working as a stable hand on a Malibu ranch, his hands rough from labor, his body away from bright lights, his heart still aching. He recited lines of untitled poems. He strummed folk melodies on a weathered guitar. The spotlight had dimmed, but his inner world burned strangely bright. Even in decline, he carried a sense of performance. In 1997, before the trial shadows fully fell, he had appeared in David Lynch's Lost Highway as the Mystery Man, a haunting, spectral figure with a pale face and sunken eyes, a man who seemed to exist outside time and place. The role was eerily prophetic. The Mystery Man mirrored Blake himself, a man both known and unknowable, a ghost in his own story. His final years were marked by frail health, retreat, and reflection. Sources report that he never fully regained his footing in Hollywood, that offers dwindled, and that public memory of him became entangled with scandal more than artistry. On March 9, 2023, he died of heart disease at his home in Los Angeles, surrounded by family. He was 89. The Washington Post +2 WJCT News, 89.9 +2. His legacy is hard to define. He remains indelibly etched in the public imagination as Tony Beretta, the tough, unshaven detective with a cockatoo, and as Perry Smith, the fragile, tortured killer in Cold Blood. But his real-life story became a mystery that no film could resolve, a narrative of love, betrayal, desperation, and redemption. He won acclaim, but his private life was haunted. He battled inner demons while the world watched. Psychologically, Robert Blake was shaped by a childhood under lights, traveling with his family in vaudeville acts, singing for strangers, absorbing applause at an age when most children slept. That early exposure backed him into a corner. He learned that his value was tied to performance, to being seen, to being applauded. Rejection cut deep, but so did success. He seemed to believe that fame was both a gift and a trap. In love, he yearned for connection, but feared betrayal. With Bonnie Lee, he found both salvation and torment. The mystery of Backley's death remains unresolved for many, not simply in legal terms, but in the collective memory. Some believe Blake orchestrated it. Others think he was innocent, a victim of circumstance, of a woman's tangled past. The gun found in the trash, the murky testimony, the tiny traces of residue, the bitter words exchanged, the desperate phone calls. They leave a trail, but no definitive conclusion. It is a story that will probably never be fully settled, and perhaps that is what makes it so haunting. No final cut, no perfect ending, only a life lived in fragments and shadows. In the end, Robert Blake's life reads like a screenplay written by a melancholic poet. He began as a child star, shone as a troubled hero, sank into scandal, and died quietly, far from the roar of Hollywood. But his story lingers, not just because of the crime, but because of the man beneath it. Flawed, fierce, fragile. His legacy is a testament to the power and peril of fame, to the dark corners of ambition, to love's complicated alchemy, and to the mysteries that lie beneath every public face. As the lights fade and the credits roll on his life, we are left with the same haunting question that hung in that Studio City parking lot on that May night. Who was Robert Blake, really? The answer, it seems, is not a verdict, but a riddle. A man who lived many lives, played many roles, and died still part of the unsolved. Welcome to Starlet Mystery. The years following Robert Blake's death on March 9, 2023, offered no final clarity. No sudden illumination that washed away the shadows that had clung to his name for more than 2 decades. Instead, his absence deepened the mystery, as if his passing folded another layer of silence over an already unresolved story. In the quiet after his death, journalists revisited the case, admirers replayed his greatest performances, and his critics re-examined every contradiction in his personality. But the truth remained as elusive as it had been in that dimly lit parking lot on May 4, 2001, where a single moment shattered the illusion of Hollywood stability in a way that would never fully mend. In the wake of Blake's life, what lingered most was not certainty, but the unsettling realization that some stories resist resolution by their very nature. To understand his legacy, one must return to the fragile internal architecture of the man himself. Robert Blake did not experience life as a smooth path, but as a labyrinth of past traumas, artistic obsessions, impulses he could not tame, and an insatiable longing for control. He carried his childhood like a ghost inside him, a relentless reminder that he had never been allowed to grow into himself without performance. Every applause he earned as a child became an unspoken contract, one that tethered his self-worth to the scrutiny of strangers. That pressure forged an intensity that would electrify the screen, but destabilize his private life. In interviews given during his later years, he spoke about trust as if it were a myth, something other people believed in, but he could not. He described himself as a man who survived rather than thrived, as if the world had always been slightly misaligned with him. Those who worked with him remembered his talent as volcanic. He acted with an instinctive force, improvising lines, shifting emotional gears in an instant. But there was a brittleness underneath, a volatility that could turn admiration into fear. Directors who praised him also admitted they approached him cautiously, as if navigating the temperament of a wild creature that could either deliver brilliance or detonate under pressure. Colleagues whispered of his sudden bursts of anger, of rehearsals thrown into chaos because Blake could not tolerate shallow performances or disingenuous behavior. For him, acting was not a job, but a raw wound he opened for strangers. Every character came from the marrow of his own pain. It is this same intensity that made his downfall so absorbing for the public. In true crime narratives, audiences often look for villains or victims, heroes or anti-heroes. But Blake's story refused such simplicity. He inhabited the gray terrain where vulnerability and aggression coexist, where a man could be both wounded and dangerous, both sincere and deeply flawed. His life invited fascination precisely because it mirrored the duality of his most iconic roles. A man defined by contradictions. A man who struggled to separate who he was from who the world needed him to be. In his final interviews, he spoke to reporters with an arresting honesty that felt almost theatrical in its vulnerability. He described loneliness as if it were a disease he had carried since childhood. He talked about his daughter, Rose, whom he believed was the one pure gift in a life marked by storms. According to sources close to his family, the years after the trial were marked by attempts at reconciliation and silence, by letters written and calls unanswered, by seasons of distance, followed by flashes of connection. It was a relationship defined not by scandal, but by the quieter, more complicated struggle of two people trying to heal from the chaos that had shaped their early lives. Hollywood, as it so often does, moved on without him. Younger audiences recognized his face only in retro clips or in haunting memes referencing the trial. But cinephiles, true students of American film history, revisited his performances with fresh eyes. His role in Cold Blood became a point of fascination, cited in classrooms as an example of emotional realism before the term became fashionable. His work in Beretta was remembered not as a relic of 1970s television, but as one of the few performances of the era that blended grit with tenderness. In film schools and acting workshops, instructors dissected his technique, the way his eyes shifted, the pregnant pauses he allowed, the unpredictable mixture of threat and vulnerability that became his signature. Yet even as his artistry was re-evaluated, the specter of the Backley case remained impossible to separate from his narrative. The events of April 18, 2002, when he was arrested for her murder, created a fissure that divided his reputation forever. Some believed he was guilty, convinced by the testimony of the stuntmen who claimed he had solicited them. Others believed he was set up, pointing to Backley's long history of manipulation, to the absence of an eyewitness, and to the untraceable murder weapon. Rumors persisted that Backley's life had been entangled with dangerous people, that her history of cons had earned her enemies, that the truth was hidden beneath layers of deception. But none of it ever matured into evidence. It remained a mosaic of half-truths, fragments, contradictory accounts, and speculation. This is where Blake's legacy becomes so psychologically gripping. He did not present himself as an innocent man wronged by fate. Instead, he carried the air of someone who had lived too many lifetimes within a single body. He once said that every time he walked down a street, he felt as if he were three people at once: the child performer, the actor, and the man who survived the trial. These fragments of self reflected a life shaped by instability. His childhood stardom, his adult fame, and the sudden collapse into legal scrutiny. Each represented a different version of him, none of which fully merged with the others. To those who knew him, he seemed haunted by the realization that he had become a supporting character in his own life. Overshadowed by a scandal he could neither escape nor conclusively resolve. In his final decade, Blake lived in a modest home away from Hollywood's glare. Neighbors recalled seeing him walking slowly through the neighborhood, sometimes wearing a hat pulled low over his eyes. His posture had grown stooped, his gait slower, but his presence retained a certain magnetic charge. He carried himself like someone who had stared into the abyss and learned to adapt to its silence. In moments of candor, he admitted he still missed acting, that he sometimes rehearsed lines alone in his kitchen, delivering monologues to the memory of a life he once lived. He told a journalist in 2019 that he still dreamed of performing in a one-man show about redemption, though he knew no producer would take the risk. What remained, ultimately, was a complicated inheritance. Robert Blake was not a villain or a hero. He was a man shaped by an unforgiving industry, a man who sought love but found volatility, a man who achieved brilliance but also descended into turmoil. His life story became a lens through which one could examine the darker undercurrents of fame, how early success can distort identity, how the hunger for relevance can warp relationships, how unresolved trauma can seep into every choice a person makes. He never escaped the shadow of November 19, 2000, the day he married Bonnie Lee Bakley. Nor did he escape the echo of the gunshots on May 4, 2001. These dates became timestamps of tragedy, points on a map that defined the rest of his life. But beneath the scandal was a deeper tragedy, that Blake spent his final years trying to prove something no courtroom could ever settle. He wanted the world to understand that he had been a man of passion, not calculation. A man searching for belonging rather than someone plotting destruction. Some believe he failed. Others believe he succeeded. But the ambiguity is what gives his story its cinematic power. Time has a way of softening memory, but not in cases like this. Instead, it sharpens the contrast. It reminds us of the nights when Blake's performances lit up television screens and of the mornings when his name was splashed across headlines. It reminds us of the delicate line between art and self-destruction. It reminds us that people can be both luminous and broken, capable of great tenderness and profound darkness. Blake lived on that line. He walked it every day, sometimes balancing gracefully, sometimes falling into the abyss. In death, his name resurfaced with headlines mentioning acquittal, scandal, and legacy in the same breath. But beneath the sensationalism, a more human portrait emerged of a man who wanted to be understood, who longed for a simplicity he never found, who grappled with the cost of living a life defined by scrutiny. Rose, now an adult, spoke occasionally about reconnecting with her father, describing him not as the man in the headlines, but as someone who could be gentle and present in quiet moments. These glimpses into his humanity do not rewrite history, but they complicate it. They remind us that behind every sensational story is a person carrying a lifetime of fragile hopes and unspoken wounds. To this day, his story remains neither fully tragic nor fully redemptive. It is a mosaic of brilliance and ruin, of fame and desolation, of passion and catastrophe. It is a story that resists closure, just as the night of May 4, 2001 resists explanation. Perhaps this is the true heart of his legacy. He lived a life that mirrored the noir films he once starred in, filled with smoky rooms, complicated hearts, and shadows that refused to lift. In reflecting on Robert Blake, one returns inevitably to the mystery that framed both his rise and his downfall. His life was a cinematic arc shaped by the unforgiving rhythms of Hollywood. It began with the simple desire of a child to be seen and ended with an old man grappling with the weight of how he had been seen. He was a performer who gave the world characters filled with pathos, danger, and humanity, even as he struggled to understand those qualities in himself. As the final image fades, the narrative settles into an unsettling truth. Some stories have no definitive ending. Blake's life did not conclude with a verdict or a revelation, but with a silence that feels almost intentional, as if he were offering the world one last performance, one final riddle to ponder. His legacy is not a clean resolution, but a haunting echo, a lingering question that keeps his story alive long after his voice has gone still. And perhaps that is why Robert Blake endures in the collective imagination. Not because of certainty, but because of mystery. Not because of answers, but because of the questions he left behind. A man whose life was shaped by shadows, whose art illuminated them, and whose story, even now, feels like a case that remains open. A case that Hollywood will study, debate, reinterpret, and resurrect for generations to come.